Hello, welcome to another episode of Test, Optimize, and Scale. It is a privilege to have Zee Jeremic here with us today, founder and CEO of Mass Engines. So going to be talking about revenue growth for B2B companies, systematically increasing funnel conversions, deal velocity, and velocity at that, going in depth here about what converts target audiences, especially on the B2B side. Zee, thanks for taking the time to join the Test, Optimize, and Scale podcast today.
Pleasure to be here.
And it's fun learning more about your background, Silicon Valley. You're up in Toronto now. Thought we could familiarize the audience with your story and into the creation of Mass Engines.
Sure, yeah. Like any aspiring driven technologist, it's kind of my background. I end up in Silicon Valley, spent about 7-8 years there. Obviously, fantastic professional experience. And ended up moving to Toronto. There was a fantastic opportunity in enterprise software here, which really kind of led to kind of this whole experience here over the last 20 years or so. I moved to Toronto. I joined a hot startup at the time called Eloqua, and they were innovating kind of the marketing and sales automation platforms, right? So as Salesforce.com was flourishing in those early days, in like 2007, 2008. Eloqua was doing kind of the corollary platform and system on the marketing side, right? Everybody knows Salesforce.com, it's essentially at this point a completely dominant CRM system on the sales side. Eloqua developed a similar system on the marketing side, so like a marketing automation platform. That was really the start of my journey. And I think that, while I'm a technologist, what I found out endlessly fascinating was that while these technologies were developed to help professionals market and sell better, really I think that there was a much bigger story around in the kind of the information explosion that emerged, right, as internet and kind of social media emerged. What resulted is all of us were empowered. We became empowered buyers because we weren't limited anymore to discovery based on conversations with sales, interactions with companies, right? So if you look at 20 or 30 years ago, let's use a B2C example. Most of us buy cars. There's it's fantastic. We work with a company that service most car dealerships, and they shared with us, this was back in like 14 or 15, that 20 years earlier, so kind of the turn of the century, people used to walk into 3 car dealerships before buying a car. So 10 years ago, that was changing already, that people were walking to 0.9 dealerships before buying cars. So there were people who were buying cars without ever walking into a car dealership, meaning they never interacted with a salesperson on the showroom floor. And I mean, here we are, we fast forward another 10 years, and you can buy a car now with a click of a button on your app. So it really is, I think it's very illustrative of this journey as the information explosion has actually ushered in the era of the empowered buyer. And the power has shifted away from the company and the salesperson onto the buyer. All right, so the buyer doesn't have to interact with a company anymore, and that has actually, I think, radically changed how companies can market and sell in today's environment.
Absolutely. And I like how you bring up some of the evolution of CRMs and moving into marketing software, what you're doing at Eloqua, Salesforce, being the behemoth at that point, and still in many respects and at the enterprise level, but all of these different tools that are out there. For me, and working with founders, it's always been about how to use the technology, not just simply having it in place. I know, the automotive world to an extent, and whether we're talking about tier 1 manufacturers, tier 2, tier 3, getting down to dealership type levels, and how these programs are used, how the follow-ups are occurring, and then moving it to more of a B2B sale. even if it's a lower cost B2B sale, far less than an automotive vehicle, automotive purchase. It's all about how the systems are being put up and put into place. I know your focuses, your thought leadership speaks to revenue growth and directly tying the usage of these tools to numbers and even how to rev up revenue by utilizing this type of technology. What are the high level views in terms of how CRMs, how B2B software, business to business, how lead funnels can be, implemented towards success versus set up, used, kind of forgotten, and going back towards old habits? The dealership saying, I don't want to mess with this tech anymore. Let me just call my clients. I'm a salesperson. I got this. What are the best strategies, the best outlooks to get proper funnels in place and beginning to have those discussions that allow for scale up of revenue?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jason, I think that I started this company to address that very question, that very problem, is because what I noticed fairly consistently is that these types of systems became a must-have just because, hey, everybody else is getting them. However, there was a massive gap between buying the tool and understanding how to use it. What are the methodologies? How do you deploy them effectively and how to utilize them effectively? And so I started Mass Engines to build revenue engines for companies, which for me is a combination of the methodologies of use that can be applied to these systems to actually generate business results. And I think that the massive opportunity that has kind of presented itself is that if you look at how traditionally companies have grown, right? If you're the CEO or a leader in a company, you've historically had three levers that you can pull if you wanted to grow, right? So you can spend more money on ads. And God knows there's a lot of people who've been doing that over the last 10 years of free money. You can spend money to hire more sales reps, or you can focus more on partnerships, distribution, resellers, etc. So I think the massive opportunity that presents itself today is that there's a fourth lever that now becomes available around how you grow revenue. And that is to actually increase the conversion ratio of your prospects to customers. And if you look at most companies, and again, we mostly work with larger B2B companies. In most companies, the conversion ratio from top to bottom of the funnel, so from the very top, someone who may have heard of you, may have interacted with your organization in some way, down to closed opportunity, they're actually become a customer, that conversion ratio in most companies is about 2 to 3%. That means if you get 100 prospects that have heard or interacted with you in some way, only 2 of those will become a paying customer. The opportunity that presents itself is that there's actually, because of the evolution of these systems and when they're employed properly within a company, so that's not just deploying a system that's augmenting your business process to take advantage of them, you can actually systematically grow your conversions through the funnel to double that conversion ratio. So you can actually, instead of converting 2 or 3%, you can get to converting to 4 to 6%. And that once you build it, that process and the technology, that becomes a permanent competitive advantage for your organization. And that's, to me, that is kind of the opportunity that presents itself, and that is what a revenue engine can enable a company to do.
So you got traffic coming in, you got leads, whether those are through advertisements, through your sales reps, through referrals from your strategic partners. Then they're going through this funnel. And as you said, the fourth component, you can then measure by conversion rate, 2 to 3%. And we even see those conversion rates digitally. I think Google says an average conversion rate is 2.35%, which I round down to 2. Or looking offline. And for anyone listening in thinking, hey, we get a 10%, we get a 20% closing rate. Zee, I think you're talking about from awareness all the way down. So yeah, maybe you get a 10% of people who sit down for meetings with you. They're on some type of video call, proposal review, perhaps. But from the top of the funnel all the way down, that 2 to 3%, you have a system that is more of a well-oiled machine and more intentional. You're mapping out, automating the customer journey to not only aid conversion rate, but the deal velocity, as you guys say over at Mass Engines. That can mean all the difference. I mean, that's twice as many sales if you're going from a 2 to 4, or 3 to 6% type of conversion rate. How do you do that? How do you be intentional about seeing a higher closing rate, higher conversion rate of a funnel? Is it just having more touch points in the funnel? Is it by having more social proof to point at, more direct messaging? What are some of the key areas that you see that type of lift in the closing rate?
So the important thing to realize is it's not any one thing alone. Any one thing alone might get you 0.1, 0.5, 0.2, 1 at best, but you can get slight improvement. So it's really a combination of these different factors applied to different points in the funnel, because different points in the funnel have different friction. And what we do and what any organization can do is to actually systematically look to analyze, identify, and remove those friction points. So, and I think that's the opportunity. When I first started Mass Engines about 12 years ago, really, I think there was maybe 1 or 2 books that were published on this topic, and they were kind of slightly, we could say they were fringe books, right? And what's been really exciting to see is that over the last 2 or 3 years, these topics have been picked up fairly widely. So you have some of the biggest advisory firms, such as Gartner and Forrester now, openly writing about the idea of a revenue engine. And there's a new movement around organizations setting up revenue operations teams. And as simple as the team that's responsible for owning the discipline within an organization of increasing conversions through the funnel. And so if you look at practically what that looks like, most organizations at this point have sales ops teams. They were set up in the 90s to help aid sales effectiveness and the use of CRM. Marketing operations teams were set up over the last 10 or 15 years to do something very similar on the marketing side. Now, these teams are, in most organizations, largely low-level tactical teams that focus on maintenance of systems and some low-level enablement. So the idea now, and again, it's been widely written about over the last 2 or 3 years by both Forrester and Gartner, is that you can actually unify these teams with a higher purpose. Great, you guys can, maintaining systems has its place, but there's a larger opportunity here, and that is to apply a set of methodologies to the funnel. So you asked, so let me now get into details, because I think maybe I'm still talking at a fairly high level. So what does this really mean in the funnel? So the easiest way to look at this is to subdivide the funnel. And we can do that right by creating funnel stages. And you subdivide the funnel based on what the buyer experiences, and also what any individual company's approach to serving the buyer is. So some stages might be entirely focused on serving the buyer. Some stages might be focused on enabling the company to respond to the buyer in a specific way. So let's look at what this looks like. So again, most folks, most companies, especially in the marketing side, what you're focusing on is generally you're focusing on optimizing your ad performance, and you're focused on optimizing, the engagement rate and the click-through rate. Now, so great, maybe we say, okay, that's a fairly well-established practice, and that's kind of the beginning. Now, the next stage you have, you can look at optimizing conversions on the forms, right, and on your website that looks to convert that traffic into an interaction, right? So if someone clicks on your ad and comes to, let's say, a landing page with some of your content, what you really want to do is you want them to register for that webinar. You want them to download some of your materials. And so there is a whole set of practices that you can do, you can apply to increase those conversion rates. And again, similar to the name of your podcast, right? Test, optimize. So it's exactly the same set of practices that we apply when looking at each individual sub-element stage of the funnel. And what you're doing is going to be very different depending on which stage of the funnel you're looking at, right? So the type of testing and optimization that you're doing to increase the engagement with your ads versus the likelihood that someone will actually interact with that landing page that they've landed is going to be very different than the type of optimizations, let's say, you're going to be doing down the lower funnel in the sales side, where now the name of the game is, how do I follow up as quickly as possible? How do I provide the most relevant piece of content? And now it really comes down to, it's much more about operationalizing certain elements of the, let's say, the kind of the SDR, BDR inside sales function. Because everyone, I think everyone understands that when someone raises their hand and says, okay, I'm ready to learn more, I want to speak to someone, the speed with which you can get back to them ultimately determines who they're going to end up talking to first, who's going to leave a bigger impression. So, and the faster the follow-up, the higher the likely you're going to catch the person, you're going to be able to connect with them when you're top of mind and when what they're researching as top of mind. So if we can get that follow-up down to 1 hour, 2 hours, 30 minutes, we greatly increases our likelihood of actually connecting directly with that buyer when they're ready. And again, there's a whole set of processes, and you can utilize, for example, a system like Salesforce. And because what most folks that historically have not understood about Salesforce, most Salesforce see that in their system as a CRM, customer relationship management system. What it really is a sales automation platform. So you can actually implement extensive business automation in that platform that can route that lead to the rep that's most available, best positioned to answer the questions or any concerns or any kind of areas that prospect is looking to discover. So that's essentially at a high level the approach that we take: subdivide the funnel and optimize the steps, interactions that are necessary in order to create the optimal experience for the buyer.
And it really is all in that follow-up, in my experience. You're mentioning the frequency, the response time. Love the idea of half hour or less, and especially over other vendors that business may be reaching out to at the same time, or perhaps it is through a referral partner, but not an exclusive referral partner, and there's multiple introductions occurring. So it shows something if you're first to respond, a level of care, the diligence behind your business. And then, as you mentioned, the amount of follow-ups, the type of follow-ups, how you're getting interaction from there. Can't say the word follow-up enough. I, in workshops, talk about the statistics for how often a salesperson follows up. I think it's like almost half of salespeople don't follow up. Quarter, a second time, 10%, maybe a third time, then stop. It almost feels defeating in human nature, right? But if you have that CRM telling you when to follow up, you have the marketing automation software, putting the follow-up out there, and then addressing value points for the target audience, showcasing momentum, traction, giving more value that's available through the product, through the offering. I say momentum and traction. We work on a lot of investor marketing campaigns. So the follow-up to investors is all showing that movement and how the organization's growing and the round is closing, even during those discussions. And when I talk about this stat with, how few follow-ups occur percentage-wise, as you get to follow-up 5, I think it's 10% of reps follow up past that manually. Meanwhile, the majority of sales occur after touch point 5, somewhere between touch point 7 and 12. These are more traditional sales metrics, the numbers are even higher when it comes to digital and how many interactions are needed before that conversion occurs. But it's always astounding to me. Most reps don't follow up enough. I was just at a conference last week. I could tell you follow-ups are still low in many of these organizations in person and after an event. Meanwhile, the majority of activations happen much later on. So I imagine that really comes to play when you're talking about mapping out a funnel conversation, what occurs much lower down the line with that type of messaging. Like you said, there's so many things to it. We've seen a lot of success by showing, as featured on logos, by showing numbers all the way to measure, so by showing stats, any type of third-party validation or something that shows magnitude or creates immediacy, along with the right call to action to work very well. When it comes to lower funnel, I know a lot of businesses struggle to determine what to write next. What do I say? How about now? Every other day, every other week? What do I do? What have you seen work the best in terms of language when it comes to later stages of that lower funnel? Just as a discussion point, not to put you on the spot of what are the one word, what are the few words that work, but just anything that you've seen to be surprising, or that if a listener, implemented, thought about, whiteboarded for their own model, it could, be fruitful.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it's not about what you say. It's about whether people buy based on trust, right? And people buy based on people buy from humans ultimately, and they still do. Yeah, you can make purchases increasingly through electronic means. However, again, when you look at consider purchases are still entirely conducted human to human. So it again, it all depends. Are we proactively reaching out based on someone engaging with us and expressing interest? The follow-up then is very much about what the buyer is interested in, because the buyer is ultimately, again, empowered in this day and age, and they don't have to come and talk to you. So if they are engaging, that usually means they're ready to learn more or to move further along their process. So again, I strongly believe that if we are promptly able to service the buyer and to support them on their journey, we're going to be able to enable any company to become more successful. And that's fundamentally, I think, that what we're focused on.
Now, once you see it producing results, how do you make your marketing a money maker? I know you guys have some systems around a profit center method and different approaches. What do you look to blueprint out for groups that work with you and being able to use this marketing report, these analytics, to take their businesses to the next level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that when you look at almost any organization, marketing is the largest discretionary budget in any organization. The reason it's discretionary is because no one can really connect it to or quantify the impact that it's making. Most people understand you need marketing, and most people understand generally the ratio based on your size and your level of growth that you need to invest a certain percentage of your revenue into marketing. However, in almost very few organizations, if at all, can you quantify the impact of marketing. That is what we're focused on. And again, when you look at 20 or 30 years ago, yeah, that was exceedingly difficult. However, when you look at the digital marketing, when you look at the fact that you can actually track and measure everything, it becomes a lot easier with the right combination of systems and business process to actually measure the impact of marketing. Now, most marketers squirm when we in their seats when we talk about this, because marketing is supposed to be creative, right? It's not necessarily supposed to be a quant exercise. So that's one. The other area that we're getting a lot of marketers become uncomfortable is, with the idea that I think most marketers understand that certain types of marketing investments are impossible to quantify, and I would absolutely agree with that. I think you look at basically like an investment that a company makes into their brand, that is exceedingly difficult to quantify. However, when you look at the percentage of marketing budget, in our experience, you can fairly quickly and easily, within a matter of months, 3 to 6 months, you can actually put in place a set of systems and processes that will let you quantify 60 or 70% of your marketing spend. And the way we're going to quantify it is we're going to first look to connect it to the pipeline, which is going to give you essentially the quotes, right? It's going to give you the dollars that those marketing campaigns have contributed to the organization. And the thing is, once you connect to the pipeline, it's fairly straightforward then to connect it to revenue outcomes. And you can actually do this fairly effectively. I mean, we can look at, again, let's take a look at one specific type of marketing, right? Field marketing. So most companies, most B2B companies specifically, have a budget for field marketing. There's a certain amount of shows. There's shows you got to be at. Hey, everyone goes. We got to be there. We have a presence. And what happens at these shows is that there's 500, 1,000 leads, quote unquote, that are generated from folks stopping by the booth, scanning the badges, right? And really, the reality is, in most of those cases, 95% of those leads are folks who stop by to get your tchotchke, or were just kind of like, passing by and said, hey, what do you guys do, right? So they're not really necessarily qualified leads. However, in every single trade show, you're going to have 20, 30, 50 high quality conversations, folks who actually stop by because they are buying, they're looking to learn more. So what we can do now is that once you come, in most organizations, you come back from the trade show, you have those 1,000, right? And you just generally, most organizations, you just upload them straight into your sales. And sales has been trained that sales, again, is compensated very differently from marketing, right? Sales is compensated based on results, based on revenue, based on pipeline that they generate. So sales has been trained not to look at most of those leads because most of them are folks looking for tchotchkes, and they're going to be a waste of time to try to sort through. However, being able to connect the 20, 30, 50 of those quality conversations and to prioritize those for sales follow-up, and then being able to connect to those same interactions to the opportunities that are open, all of a sudden we're able to show that, hey, that $100,000 we spend on being at that trade show, or $500,000, $1 million, we can show that it resulted in $5 million worth of pipeline that we opened, and down the road, maybe then it resulted in $2 million of revenue. So now all of a sudden it radically changes how we look at which trade shows we go to, because we can actually quantify the impact of that investment rather than just saying we have to be there. Again, we have to be there, maybe still a valid argument. However, you can get a whole nother level of insight around how the marketing investments are actually contributing to the top line of the company, both pipeline and revenue. And again, we can look at digital as well. And others kind of transition this example to digital. Most folks, even some of the companies, if you look at in our experience, it's kind of like maybe 5% of the companies have tried some kind of attribution. And most of the time they buy a tool and they rely on the tool and its kind of set up to completely control what attribution looks like. And the tools have only limited utility because they can only do as much as business process is set up to allow them to do. So there's a much bigger gain to be realized by actually aligning the business processes, what these tools are doing. And you can actually don't even need these tools. You can actually set most of this attribution up with your existing systems. And so what you can do is you end up tagging every asset, every marketing campaign. Again, the easiest way to talk about tags is UTM parameters. Most folks who've done any digital understand UTM parameters. However, in most organizations, UTM parameters stop and die at the website, right? At the Google reporting. However, you can or Adobe Analytics, you can actually pass those tags down through your marketing automation and sales automation systems to be able now to connect the opportunities that are open against those campaigns and against specifically the tactics and the channels that were used in those campaigns to result in those opportunities being open.
So using UTMs, a unique tracking URL, maybe there's one that's showing up with the follow-ups to the conferences and another showing up from each one of 10 creative advertisements, the creatives for 10 advertisements you're running. So you could tell, hey, this is where this traffic's coming from. Here's how the traffic is evolving. For the conferences, man, what a game changer to be able to say, yeah, we spent $100,000 in field marketing. Meanwhile, it produced 2 million for us. We're going to try to do twice the amount of conferences. We may anticipate some type of drop by having less specific conferences we're attending, but here's how we're going to be able to use marketing, to use other lead gen sources, field marketing, advertising, outreach, strategic partners, maybe content that's being distributed, different types of PR to physically fuel your business to be a powerful revenue engine, right?
That's right. It changes the conversation, right? Because all of a sudden it's the conversation is not, well, you just have to spend money on marketing. And that is especially now, right, with the changes in the business environments where money isn't free and it's not growth at all costs. There's, marketing budgets are going to come under a lot more pressure. And if you don't have a compelling argument for why you need to keep your budget at its current rate, you're going to lose your budget. So being able to quantify the impact that that marketing budget is having on the organization, both pipeline and revenue, it drastically changes the kind of conversation marketing is able to have at the executive table and defend their budget.
In a lot of cases, we're working with earlier stage organizations. I know you work with a lot of Fortune 500s. We'll work with startups who are being matched with retail investors through these marketing campaigns. And in many of those situations, one marketing budget has to produce the next. So if we're not talking about the pixel data, if we're not talking about which traffic sources are producing at the highest levels and optimizing towards those, there's simply not going to be another investment into marketing. If we're able to identify pockets of performance that are showing much greater returns than the other sources they're being averaged with, it can really break the mold. It can be a way that we can boost pipeline growth, whether it's investors or customers, clients, users, ongoing basis. I mean, that's the whole philosophy of test, optimize, scale. It's optimize it to its best point, provide opportunities to scale, and that's allowed for larger marketing spends towards exponential amounts of growth from there than what any group could commit to going into it up front. But I've seen it's really in the founders, it's really in the marketing teams to understand that, to be able to see the analytics and then look at that as the green light to ramp things up quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what we're seeing, again, even though we work primarily with larger companies to help them adopt these practices, what we've seen repeatedly over the last few years is that it's actually the Series A and Bs that are baking in these types of revenue operations practices right into the organization as they scale. It makes a massive difference if you have these types of methodologies built into the organization from the start, rather than trying to retrofit a larger organization down that. Even though, again, that's what we specialize in, there's massive gains because being able to bake this into an organization at a later date that already has the volume, right? Increasing those conversions can be massive, but most of the uptake for revenue operations and for this type of methodical approach to building revenue engines is actually happening at the smaller scale. Companies that are looking to actually build that growth into the organization from the start, have that higher conversion ratio from the start. There's a lot higher uptake at the smaller side.
Mm-hmm. There's so many more businesses operating at that level. I think I remember reading at one point that 90% of businesses are small businesses. There's only so many at the enterprise level, so it's definitely applicable, to our listeners, to founders, and definitely marketing professionals, VCs that have taken these larger businesses up to their points of market share. So it's not to limit with smaller businesses. If you're listening in from a larger organization, this is exactly how Zee and his team, his company are doing it. And really want to highlight again that focus on the conversion rate, because just scaling up the leads to a 2 to 3% funnel or one that's converting at 4 to 6%, makes all the difference. And Zee, if anyone's listening in right now and they're wondering how they could implement some tactics into their model, I know you like to unite and conquer, see what's working, be able to tackle it from there. What are some of the ultimate sales and marketing integration strategies, and how could listeners look to adopt and test that into their own growth?
Yeah. I mean, on the lowest hanging fruit in most organizations is the disconnect between silos, especially when the silos are actually working on the same problem. So if you look at marketing and sales to this day, in most organizations still operate as siloed organizations. However, they're both working on solving the same problem, which is how do we attract and close prospects into actual customers. And there's massive inefficiency in that handoff process between marketing and sales. So I think the lowest hanging fruit for most organizations is to actually align marketing and sales and optimize the handoff of marketing leads to the sales teams to increase the ability of the sales team and the willingness of the sales team to respond promptly to the leads that are generated. Now, obviously, part of this is also prioritizing the leads that are generated into ones that are actually high intent, rather than just folks that are just shopping around. So I think that's just one of the areas really low hanging fruit. Another area again that I think the kind of low hanging fruit is that most organizations are generating traffic to their web properties and through their digital marketing, or even just through their regular marketing and sales outreach. There's massive opportunities for improving the results of that traffic. So the engagement of that traffic and the hand raisers that you're going to be able to get from that traffic. And again, small changes can make a big impact. Literally, it can be how that landing page or the home page or whatever you're sending the traffic to, how it's structured. So you can talk about having clear call to actions. We can talk about clean design. There's a lot of different elements, even clarity of action. Like, what are you expecting that buyer to do? What are you serving up to them? And is that actually catering to their journey and where they're at? So I think those are two kind of areas that I think most companies can generate some fairly quick wins by looking at the two areas. But honestly, there's half a dozen other areas we kind of start looking at and discussing.
Sure. And I think those are great areas to emphasize as well. I like that you're going the extra layer deep too. Sometimes I'll read this, marketing 101 content without actual exercises that can be, tested out. What about optimizing? What if it's not working right out of the gate? New funnel gets put out there. How do you look to improve it and really manage it to a point of effectiveness?
Yeah, the only way to optimize is to measure, right? And that the measurement that is in place in most organizations is just it's usually less than, right? So even when you look at, again, just ads, what are we measuring? Most organizations, in views, like we got to look at, like, you got to move between views, right? Like that's what ultimately, when you're buying ads, you're buying views. So really the question becomes, how effective are you at converting those views into clicks? And then how effective are you converting those clicks into engagement and into ideally some kind of an hand raise? So you have to measure. And again, this is where we get into connecting marketing to revenue outcomes, because there's no better measurement than ultimately revenue. But even in areas where we're unable to go to that extent, you still can set up ways to measure the subdivide. Again, whenever the problem seems impossible to measure, that's because we're looking at the problem is too big. The problem that we're looking to measure is too big. So we need to subdivide into smaller components and then look to measure the performance of those components. And then we optimize the components. If you optimize 4 different components in a whole, you're going to optimize the performance of the whole.
Having it really broken out, subdividing it's going to tell you a lot more, especially if you're making variance for each of those KPIs, each of those measurements, each key performance indicator you're looking to hit. And then what about when it comes to scale? You've built the funnel out. Is it just a matter of finding enough of the target audience members that funnel has been customized for? Is it then creating additional funnels from there, or really just looking at how much can be bought, how many views, how many field marketing leads can be bought, can be produced from that traffic, from that lead generation?
Yeah, I mean, the beautiful thing about the revenue engine is that it is a scaling methodology in and of itself. Mm-hmm. Because if we're improving your conversion ratio from top to bottom, right, that means that every dollar that you put in at the top is going to have twice the impact on the bottom. So putting these types of practices, building out this type of a revenue engine, ultimately improves the performance of your whole funnel organization, so your sales, marketing, and sales organization, giving any organization, I think, more confidence that, hey, like we're not just burning money at the top of the funnel. We're actually you can develop, it becomes fairly straightforward to develop formulas around how much you need to put at the top to be able to produce a certain amount on the bottom. Again, this is where we get into connecting marketing and revenue can be a huge step in that direction.
Very nice. Any success stories, any examples that you could share in terms of scale?
I mean, yeah, massive. I mean, again, I think that I'll give you, I mean, we have done this at scale for Samsung, for example, like a really large organization. And again, I think some of the best, I'll give you 2 examples from Samsung, and I'll talk about a smaller company. So, for example, for Samsung, for one group at Samsung, what we did was we optimized exactly what I mentioned, a handover between marketing and sales. And fairly straightforward, the reality is that most leads were not leads. They were, they weren't folks who are actually, they weren't high intent leads. They weren't people who were interested. So we ended up holding back 50% of the leads. They weren't leads. Again, that's a shocking thing to think about. Oh my God, what do you mean you're not passing leads? But here's what ended up happening. We held back 50% of the leads because they weren't leads. They were just wasting sales time. So what happened is you doubled the time that sales reps had to spend with the other 50%. We lost, not only did we not lose a single opportunity, we grew opportunities by 10% from that exercise, because sales reps had more time to spend with the high intent leads, the real leads, rather than those folks who stopped by the booth and picked up a tchotchke, right? So that's, and it was fantastic. I mean, I think it was something like there was a massive improvement in their conversion ratios to the funnel, right? 10% bump to opportunities. I think there was something like a 60% bump to the pipeline that was being generated. So pretty massive improvements. Another area, again, I'll give you another example. This is a different group at Samsung, is that we help them connect marketing investments to revenue outcomes. And that led to a massive year-over-year increase in marketing budget. Because, hey, all of a sudden you're able to communicate to the organization how the investments that are being made in the marketing are actually impacting revenue at the organization. And so literally year over year, and the leader we work with they end up running the entire marketing team, or after about 2 or 3 years, and massively growing that team on the back of that type of insight and analysis. Now, again, you could say, okay, well, Samsung, it's a very large organization, lots of resources, et cetera, et cetera. So let's look at a smaller organization. So an organization like Return Path. So the Return Path is essentially like a SaaS solution, at about 80 or 90 million in revenue when we work with them. And there's 2 areas. Again, we helped optimize the sales handoff of leads from marketing to sales. That resulted in a massive increase in sales productivity. And then we helped optimize the conversions on the web forms, right? They were generating a lot of traffic. They weren't converting a lot of it. So literally, we did a small optimization on some of their forms that end up resulting in a 30% improvement in conversion on those forms, which for them meant 1,000 extra leads every year. I mean, and the ROI on that ended up being something like 5,000%, because it doesn't take a lot to create a big impact.
Doesn't take a lot to create a big impact. I love that perspective and lens, trying to guess how much of an impact it makes for a company like Samsung, and the percentages that you're referring to, what were 5,000%. I mean, these really show that you make those adjustments to that stage of the funnel, to the interaction. Yeah, you may need to throw away some of the leads that aren't really leads, but the ones that come through are going to be of a lot more value to you, and over time, and even open up more marketing budget and scale at that. Awesome. Well, Zee, we've been able to touch on a lot of points here as we begin to wrap up the conversation. Any final points you want to leave listeners with, and what is the best way for them to get in contact if they want to know more about the powerful revenue engine, they want to know more about mass engines in general? Where is the best place for them to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, again, I would just encourage your listeners to literally, you can just Google revenue operations and revenue engine. There's lots of great materials. And again, even Gartner and Forrester are writing a ton of content on this topic. You can come to our site. We have a wealth of resources at massengines.com. We have an ebook on how you transform marketing to a profit center. We have an ebook on building a best-in-class lead management system, which is which is essentially the core of a revenue engine. So there's a ton of great content on our site. It's all free. You don't even have to give us an email address. We're sharing it openly and freely because we're so confident that this type of content is going to make a massive impact for you, and that if you generate massive impact, at some point you're either going to call us or you're going to refer us. So pretty simple.
There you go. I like that. I sign up for so many white papers and give my email address away. The value's there. They'll get in touch with you. I think it's a bold statement, a bold action to be able to give it away for free. And Zee, want to thank you so much for taking the time to educate listeners with everything that you're seeing at Mass Engines, allowing for conversions at Samsung and various Fortune 500s that you're working with directly. Really appreciate the time.
Awesome, Jason. Thank you so much.
And I want to thank all listeners. Appreciate you logging into these podcasts and sharing. We will see you next time.